Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Perret, and I am hosting today's webinar on the subject of W3C Immersive Web Working Group and web-based augmented reality. Thank you for attending. Today's webinar will have a presentation and then a panel discussion. As in other webinars, you'll be in listen-only mode, but you are invited to put your questions into the question widget as part of the GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar will be recorded and the archive will be published in a day or two on the Area YouTube channel, and I'll be able to share that with everyone. It's a pleasure to conduct this webinar because it is part of the Interoperability and Standards program, which I'll be sharing more about with you in just a minute. Okay, so this is the high-level overview of today's webinar, and now I'll share with you the little background about the area. You may or may not know that the area focuses on those enterprise use cases and people who are using augmented reality for performance improvements, error reduction, and risk reduction. So the enterprises sort of sit at the top of this pyramid, and it's supported by two other segments, or what we call, the segments of the AR ecosystem. The providers of technologies, and that spans many different types of technologies, software and hardware, and the non-commercial entities, universities, research institutes, and others that are doing research and providing support to both the enterprises and providers. So the area is accelerating the growth of these three segments and supporting them through a variety of thought leadership content. So we provide that on our website, through social media channels and webinars like this one, networking and physical meetups, as well as we're developing a marketplace to help the providers and the buyers of solutions find one another. We are supporting the programs that will continue to educate people, professionals that can work in enterprise systems, IT, and other operational systems to make sure that AR is integrated and is operating smoothly at all times. And finally, we have another pillar of reducing the barriers to adoption. And that takes the form of many different committees. So we have the research committee, which I chair. We have a safety committee and security, and those allow members to discuss specific barriers and to work on new options and strategies to reduce those barriers. In the summer of 2019, the area introduced the Interoperability and Standards program, and this webinar is a component of that. I like to talk about it as an integral part of what customers need. A few years ago, the area developed this schema of customer needs, and what you have on your screen is a snapshot of an interactive system that documents different types of use cases, and then from those use cases, what kinds of requirements the customer has. And in some cases, the customers have multiple vendors that are providing different components. And so the customer has a requirement or a special need to operate, build, operate, and use solutions that have different sources. And they want to do that without custom engineering. So that's one way in which interoperability can bring value, reduces the barrier to entry, and it reduces the cost and friction that these companies have just to have a multi-vendor solution, maybe because of a roll-up of companies or because different use cases require different hardware many different reasons why you can get into a multi-vendor solution. Another reason is even if they are using a single vendor solution, enterprises, once they start deploying AR at a large scale, they need to integrate with their other systems, other software and hardware, including their security systems and their operations, so that they can manage their businesses in the same way that they managed it before they introduced AR. It's all part of the digital transformation that companies are entering and to some degree following. I think that many companies encounter barriers to this integration or this interoperability because there has not been a lot of expression of those requirements, specific requirements, and because the companies that provide solutions have not had a way to provide interoperability. So we want to expand the discussion and increase the knowledge of everybody, all the different ecosystem segments, about the benefits and the approaches to interoperability. And then parallel with that, to encourage the development of standards, as well as other approaches like open source, for example, to reaching interoperability. And so that's our goals. If those are our goals, then the ways we want to go about it is to provide thought leadership content, explaining in many different ways and to different audiences why interoperability is desirable and how to achieve it. We can also have more support, to have a structured support for standards organizations that are specifically working on AR standards or standards that could produce interoperability. And if and when they reach that stage, some of our members could be qualified to review draft specifications. We can also help support, or we can organize and conduct events like plug fests or workshops focusing on interoperability. And finally, when there are implementations, our members can test and give feedback about the real world results. So those are a few remarks, some points I wanted you to know about the Interoperability and Standards Program, and I encourage you to follow that. We'll be sharing more information about it in the future. Today's webinar is focusing on, as I said, the W3C Immersive Web Working Group, and we will be first hearing from Ada. She's going to present to us some of the background and the current status, and then we will have a panel discussion following her presentation. So, Ada, I'm now going to make you the presenter. Oops, I'm going to do that more gracefully. So, Ada, can I hear your voice, please?
Hiya, I'm here.
Okay, fantastic. There you are. So I've made you presenter, and I believe you, there we go. Perfect. See your slides. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So hi, I'm Ada Rose Cannon. I'm a developer advocate for the web browser Samsung Internet. I'm also co-chair of the Immersive Web Working Group. And with me today are Lars Bergström from Mozilla. You want to unmute yourself and quickly introduction?
Sure. I'm the Director of Engineering for Mixed Reality at Mozilla. So we make the web browser Firefox, and our team handles browsers for the full set of VR and AR devices that are available today.
I'm Blair McIntyre.
Hi, I'm Blair. I'm both a professor at Georgia Tech doing research on augmented mixed reality, and I work in Lars's group at Mozilla, leading up research on the AR side, primarily of WebXR.
Both Blair and Lars work with me in the Immersive Web Working Group, which is the group that's developing the WebXR device API, which is the API that lets you do augmented reality and virtual reality on the web. So they'll be helping throughout this this slide deck. So WebEx Device API is kind of a complex API because it covers a very large scope, but it only has two main things in what it does. So it exposes information from the Immersive Platforms APIs. So by Immersive Platforms, I mean stuff like ARKit, AR Core, or whatever the virtual reality platforms are using on different headsets, and what some of the AR platforms are exposing from the augmented reality headsets like HoloLens and the Magic Leap. So this gives the information such as the current head position or location in the real world, the position and rotation of the controllers as well. It then also uses the same XR platform to display information back to the user, letting you display VR and AR content back on the hardware in a way that's best suited for the device itself. Now, I've kept this in very general terms because it works on all kinds of different formats, from headsets and handsets and future devices as well. But because it only does these two things, it doesn't concern itself with any of the rendering, anything beyond getting the information and sending it back. You have to do it yourself, which may at first seem like quite a restriction, but it actually is a huge boon, because WebGL has been around in the web since 2011. This is what you use to do to render graphics in the web and to send to the headset. So because it's been around for over 8 years at this point, there is a huge community of web developers out there working in many different libraries across many organizations. So there's like Microsoft's Babylon.js, there's 3JS, which is hugely popular. There's a pretty new one called A-Frame VR, which is a HTML library. So you write HTML and you get VR capable and AR capable WebGL out the other end, which, because of its ease of learning, has ended up with a huge community ecosystem. And there's many others as well. The developer ecosystem around graphics in the web is surprisingly large. Until WebXR, there were two ways to do immersive stuff in the web. So for VR, you could use the WebVR API, which is unfortunately now deprecated. The WebVR API was very similar to WebXR in that it only exposed a way to render content on a VR headset, and it gave you the position and rotation of the headset and the controllers. For handheld AR, you can use one of the popular libraries to do AR using a mobile phone. So this is ARJS, which is marker-based, and there's Eighth Wall, which is SLAM-based. Eighth Wall is really quite remarkable, considering it does very fast, accurate, or pretty accurate AR tracking with just the information from the camera feed from your phone and some like device orientation, and it uses that and a computer vision library all compiled to WebAssembly to give you AR. It's quite remarkable. So I definitely recommend checking out if you haven't checked it out yet, but also check out WebXR as well. So I can talk a little bit about like what happened to WebVR. So WebVR was an experimental API, which is now deprecated for accessing the screens and the sensors of VR hardware. And it was really good. It proved the need for VR on the web. It was incredibly popular and it had lots of developers working for it. It had a few prototype implementations from like Firefox, Samsung, Chrome, and I think some others as well. And it was really interesting. It really allowed exploration of the problem space, and it ended up but the way it was built was just the shortest possible path for VR on the web. It was like the minimum viable product for VR, but it which did give it some issues. So it was developed mostly outside of the standards process. It was just, let's get something working. There were issues how it integrated with other bits of the web platform, such as the Gamepad API and WebGL. It didn't support AR because it was before AR like hardware started to land, but it did share a lot of domain with AR, which meant that when AR came around, it needed to be rethought. And it didn't really have much consideration for supporting devices in the future and device and the longevity of the API. So it kind of, I think it was 2014, the WebVR API was started. In 2017 was the first like WebVR face-to-face where we all got together to discuss it. Shortly after that, it evolved into WebVR 2.0. This was kind of it was considered to be like the future of WebVR and what it was going to be. And alongside that, there was a Web AR API being developed. And this was for around 6 months. But near the end of 2017, actually, yeah, around, what was it, 2018? Yeah, about a year and a half ago. So that would be 2018. It was kind of decided that VR and AR, because they have so much, they share so much of their problem space, they can be combined into a single API, which was named WebXR. And so you hear Web AR quite a lot, but as an API, it was never actually released in stable browsers. Whereas WebVR did actually have a few, it was released as a origin trial in Chrome and was usable in Firefox and Samsung Internet for a good long while. So WebXR is intended to entirely place WebVR and include within it AR. But the nice thing about it is because it's an evolution of WebVR, the polyfill for it, a polyfill is a library which backfills differences between APIs. So if WebVR is available on a headset, the polyfill will enable to use WebXR, even if it hasn't landed yet. So on lots of headsets today, this actually allows you to do WebXR for virtual reality out the box already, even though it's only just landing in browsers today. Oh, I realized the next slide actually had that timeline. So I'm just going to skip over this, but if you want to take a quick look. So yeah, it was 2017 when WebXR replaced WebVR and Web AR, and when the Immersive Web Working Group was founded. So I'm just going to leave that up for a sec, so you can take a look. And now I'm going to go to the next slide. So the main goals of WebXR is to allow a developer to build a single immersive 3D experience which works across a range of devices. So you can build a website, a single website with a single code base and a single build that targets every single VR and AR headset out there, which is incredibly powerful. Well, every single AR and VR headset which has an WebXR enabled browser, which hopefully will be most of them. So this is going to be incredibly powerful, especially if you want to do VR and AR on a budget, you can target the whole ecosystem, which is currently quite fragmented. So that's really nice. For VR, there's a thing known as inline sessions. These are sessions which you view them like a magic window. So your phone becomes a window into the virtual world. So you can use this to display some content to the user, to give them a taste of the content, to as like a first step to making them want to try it out in a headset, or to press the augmented reality button to view it in augmented reality. And you can also have a single website that does target VR and AR. And because it's largely based on the same system, when you put into AR, all you have to do is hide the skybox and the environment and just leave the stuff you want to show in AR, which is really powerful if you just want to show the users some object in an environment. Of course, I can imagine many of you want to target specifically AR, and that's fine too. The web itself brings many benefits to WebXR. So as I mentioned earlier, WebXR is designed to be future-proof. So if you go on a website today from 1995, if you're like me, or if you're a big fan of Space Jam, like I still regularly go to the Space Jam website. And sure, it was made in 1995 and has been updated since, but it still works and you still expect it to work. Well, it's going to be the same for websites made to use the WebXR device API. We hope that if you build a website with WebXR device API, that it'll work on headsets today, but also headsets which haven't even been invented yet. And they'll have appropriate fallbacks to the content, and everything should work really nicely still. You can reach lots of devices with a single code base. You can make like phones, tablets, laptop, desktop, head-mounted. If it is some kind of immersive display, you can make it work. So for phones, you can do handheld AR. For laptops and desktops, you can plug in a headset, or you can click and drag to look around. And head-mounted displays should just work, just as it would with any other content in the head-mounted display. For many XR developers, for many web developers, WebXR device API is the fastest way for them to get started, because they already have a background with existing web technologies and JavaScript libraries. So you can take advantage of this huge pool of developers to start building immersive content rather than having to hire expensive game developers. You can get engaged with other web standards. So you can use the Web Audio API for 3D positional audio. You can use WebRTC for streaming video or sharing your desktop, letting people do communicate with each other between desktop and headset, or even just between headsets. You can use WebSockets to set up single instances with hundreds of users in the scene at the same time. You can use web payments to quickly take payments in a single click without the user having to go through the long process of typing in their address and payment details again and again, which can be a really tricky process in VR and AR. You can use the geolocation API to do spatial boxing for experiences. So you can have people go to a place and provide them an experience which makes sense for where they are. And you can use the screen capture API to share screens between computers, or be able to help users immersively. And the nice thing about the web is that you don't have to build an app. You're not constrained to an app store or make people do extra 100 megabyte downloads. the user already has the XR platform on their device already. All you have to do is provide the assets and they get instant start. You can show assets as they download, give people a give people an experience which progressively gets better as they use it, and yet starts instantaneously. So you get massive audience engagement. It's really powerful. So I've talked up a lot about like how good it is, but when can you use it? So implementations are being worked on right now, and they should be landing over the next 6 months. So tomorrow it's landing in stable on Chrome and Chrome 79. And you can try it out but today, like right now, by downloading the beta or enabling it in Chrome flags. It's coming to Firefox Reality for Android standalone headsets like the Oculus Quest in the first quarter next year. There's a demo for Firefox Reality coming to the HoloLens 2 later this month. And there's the WebEx view on iOS, which is will be updating in December. For the browser I work on, Samsung Internet, we're shipping it in the second quarter 2020. But you can start using it for VR today using the polyfill. Unfortunately, we can't polyfill augmented reality, but everything else should work. So what can WebXR do today? So for virtual reality, it's already a feature complete replacement for WebVR. This was our big announcement a couple of months ago that we're already ready to do that. And that's why lots of browsers have started shipping it and turning off their WebVR API. AR is, if I'm being honest, is still a bit basic. So right now you can position your 3D scene in space with a height relative to the floor. So you can position stuff on the floor, but you can't detect tables and walls yet. But that is being worked on, and it will be landing in the future. But the nice thing about it is that it does support handheld mode and head mounted with the same code. So as I said before, one release, same code. You don't have to detect head or hand. It'll just give the user the best experience if they're on handheld or head mounted. These are some of the libraries I mentioned earlier, which you can use to start building it with. So this Babylon.js made by Microsoft. There's 3JS, which is a very long maintained, huge community library. It's very well supported and it's been around for a very long time. It's currently on version 111, so it's been going a long time, and it's very it has a lot of community engagement behind it. There's lots of information and tutorials on how to get started. It's fantastic. And there's one which I really like, which is A-Frame. So A-Frame is a HTML wrapper for 3JS. So you write HTML and you get VR ready and AR ready WebGL scene out the box with just like 7 lines of code. It's really powerful, and I really like that one. And because HTML is like a nice way to develop. So these are some of the topics which we're working on next. So WebXR and the WebXR AR module have landed. Hit testing and real-world geometry are AR modules to help you place your virtual objects in the scene. There's lighting estimation for letting you light your virtual objects in a way that's similar to the real world to give them more integration. There's anchors that let you do like more long distance position tracking. Geo alignment, like it's kind of similar. DOM overlays lets you use HTML to make 2D interfaces. So you can, because right now, because it's purely WebGL based, if you want to do any kind of interface, you have to rebuild it out of 3D elements, which for most people, like for a lot of developers, it shouldn't really be a problem, but it can provide some issues in VR. For example, when you get close to something that's rendered as a bitmap, you will start getting pixelated, and it'll be hard to read and kind of difficult. So DOM overlays will let you design 2D interfaces with HTML and CSS, which like have been a great way to build 2D interfaces for almost 30 years now. And you can use them like in AR and VR. And we're also working on camera access and support for computer vision. So you can start doing stuff like detecting what's in the scene and using it for to give feedback to the user, or to place objects onto particular labels, or recognize objects. So these are handled in a mixture of the Immersive Web community group and the working group. I'll explain the difference about those a bit later. But some of these are probably going to be landing, or will have prototypes implementations like very soon over the coming year. Some of them are a bit more in the future, but you can follow the progress on all of these on the Immersive Web GitHub, because all the work we do is done in the open. The participants in the Immersive Web working group, well, there's quite a lot of them. The ones on this slide are just a few of them. So we have Microsoft and Google, Magic Leap and Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Samsung, and Mozilla. And they're just like some of the bigger organizations. We're a very large working group that's very active. And so it's exciting to see all of these companies working together to produce a single XR platform that will work across all of their products.
Ada?
Yeah.
Just on the previous slide, those are the companies themselves are supporting this by having their employees, their staff and engineering work on browsers. Is that right? It's not the whole company that's working on it. It's engineering resources from each one.
The companies I mentioned here have staff involved in the Immersive Web working group, so they're participating in the standards. So I probably can't, like, you can't take it as a sure sign that they're working on some kind of implementation or some kind of product, but they're certainly interested enough in the API itself to have an opinion about it and get involved in working out what the future of the API is going to look like.
Great, thank you.
And if you want to get involved, if your company is already part of the W3C, you can ask your AC rep to make you join the working group, and they can add you, and you can already get straight involved. If your company is not part of the W3C, you can join up and get involved. Amazon actually joined the W3C just to take part in this working group, which is incredibly cool. I'm very grateful to Amazon. If you aren't able to join the W3C and you want to get involved, you can get joined. Anyone can get involved in working with the community group. The community group and the working group are two different groups that work side by side. So the community group was the original group that developed WebVR, and they do and currently they do a lot of the more future-facing work. The APIs are proposed in the community group in the proposals repo, so you can check that out to see what's going to be coming soon. If a popular issue in the proposals repo will become its own incubation, where the majority of the work will get done. Once the API is quite mature, and there are prototypes in browsers, or there are polyfills, or even implementations, then it gets moved into the working group, where the API gets finalized and made into a web standard within the W3C. Because within the W3C, only working groups can make web standards. So work does get done on standards within the working group, but it's more to take the APIs the final distance. Here is where you can find out some more information about what we're working on. So the most active place to go is our GitHub. It's where almost all of our communication happens. There's a lot of issues going on. You can stay up to date if you just want to follow stuff. All the work is done in the open. You don't need to be a member to look. Just like check it out and see what is around. You'll also find a link to the explainers there, because below that I have a link to the spec, and the spec is really interesting, but it's really in depth and probably goes into more detail, whereas the explainers, which would be anything that ends in explainer.md, is probably going to be a lot more human readable and make a lot more sense. And it's a great way to see some of the nitty-gritty details that goes on in explaining how things should work across different devices. Because that's where most of the problem space comes from. It's even though the API itself only does a few things, because it has to work across many devices, it ends up having to have a lot of problems that need to be like addressed to ensure the behavior is clear between all the different formats. And the last link is our website on the W3C, where you can see stuff like our charter and upcoming face-to-faces and stuff like that. Our charter is probably due to expire in March, so we're looking to write a new one at the moment. So it's probably not going to be too interesting right now because it's been around for 1.5 years already. But thank you so much for listening, and I'm now gonna take questions with Blair, Lars, and I.
Great, thank you, Ada. That was very nice. On the web links on the previous page, isn't there also a website that you're working on that helps people to find the versions of browsers and gives
yes, there is
information for implementers?
Yeah, if you go to immersiveweb.dev, so it's immersiveweb, all one word, .dev, D-E-V, Delta Echo, whatever the word is for V, which I've forgotten.
Victor?
Victor, yes, Delta Echo Victor. Then I would go to it here, but it wouldn't let me set the address bar. So yeah,
that's okay. So
then
that's good. That's good. Wanted to make sure that got into people's brains and minds as well.
Oh, I can type it into the chat. There you go.
Great.
So yeah, if you go there, you'll find almost all the information that I've just talked about. You don't have to I should have told you before, in case anyone's been very studiously taking notes throughout all of this, that most of the information is already online. So this is a website which I work on that just tries to keep all the information up to date for developers. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take the screen back. Let's see, so that we just have the names and faces of our panelists. There we go. There we go. Yeah, I see. So I want to thank you, Ada, and welcome Blair and Lars. It's really exciting to see the progress that we've made, that you've made. And I think you've done a great job of sort of setting expectations not too high, trying to manage expectations. Can we describe in any way what the user will see? What difference is it going to make? What will an AR experience delivered in a web browser is going to do what? How is it going to help us?
So it's probably going to help by, in my opinion, being the best way for first-time users to get on board, because it's if you're going to have people landing on your website to find out what you're all about, you can show them something right there and then. You don't lose users through the funnel of having to redirect them to app stores or to installers, or even redirect them to other pieces of hardware to try it out. So you can have people engaged immediately, especially on stuff like if you want to do AR, if you have an AR experience and you have something that that works on the phone, then if they're already browsing your website on the mobile web, which most users will be because most browsing is done on mobile phones these days, and you have an inline AR ready experience, they can push one button and then be viewing it through their phone. And for some people, this might be their whole experience. That might be all they need, and they'll have the same thing that works in a headset. For other people, where what can be provided through the WebEx device API right now isn't enough, then what this can provide is a taster of a larger experience, and you can say, yes, this is giving you the idea of what we do in a way that a 2D screen can never represent. Now put on your HoloLens and download this app and try this.
Okay. Lars or Blair, do you have anything that you could add about comparing an AR experience in a web browser versus the native application? I guess this would get into, the strengths and limitations of one side or the other.
So I think the big thing for me is it partly depends on the context of your use and the ecosystem you're in, especially when you think about enterprise scale applications. If, as Ada said, if you're already in a web page, whether it's displayed in front of you on a head mount or on your phone or laptop, for whatever application you're using, the ability to add an AR or a VR experience when it's appropriate, right? So I can be browsing my maintenance instructions, going through my training experience, and then there's a little button that says, oh, you can go into AR here, or oh, you can go into VR here, and I can pop into it as a user as appropriate if it's something I want to do. Maybe I want to just actually read it or watch the video. I could also continue doing that on the web. So it's this ability to think from the viewpoint of I can do AR or VR when I want to, when it's appropriate on the device I'm using, without having to commit to going to another app, or from the point of view of creating that content, having to build an entire app that also does 2D and 3D and all these things and install it and get it everywhere. And the other thing is,
it's kind of a branch. Think of it as it's another branch on your tree of options.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's useful to think of augmented reality and virtual reality, sort of the spectrum of mixed reality, as a feature and not an application, right? We don't talk about usually building video apps or building 2D apps anymore, right? They are a way of conveying information. And I think after the shine wears off of AR and VR and people try to use it in the real world, we'll start thinking of it as a thing, a media that we might use when it's appropriate, but it's not sort of thing we use for everything necessarily, right? There's still 2D content, there'll still be video and so on. So being able to integrate it into the rest of the ecosystem you're using is a huge, huge benefit, both for the developers and the users of the applications.
So users will find AR experiences as links shown on other web pages or web scenes.
Or as part of the pages they're on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't, but also because of the linking, it's like I can message you a link, you can get it in your email, you can get it in your browser. You know, one of the things I really like about the way we've got Firefox set up across the ecosystem is the ability to send a device. So when I get a link on my desktop browser, I can click send a device and send it to my Quest right now and pop it up, or eventually send it to my iPhone and pop it up there. And I don't have to sort of always be consuming on the device that I'm going to be doing AR on, or always consuming on the device that I'm going to be doing VR on. It's just a link. I can communicate it any way I can communicate a link.
It's a very our future is very multi-device. Whereas I think over the last 5+ years, we've been kind of going further and further and further to consolidating things on one smartphone. So this one screen called a smartphone that I'm carrying in my pocket or my purse or whatever. And you're talking about a future that's where there's device diversification instead of consolidation. Is that a fair summary?
I think so. I mean, it's, we all fantasize about a future, maybe we all don't, but in the AR space, people often fantasize about a future where we're just wearing the AR display and it replaces all the other devices. And that may happen at some point, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, right? And so it will be this.
That's not diversification. That's consolidating, right, only on a different platform or a different form factor.
Right. And so in the near future, which is, a good number of years, yeah, it's going to be phones and tablets and laptops and desktops and head mounts and all these things. And we're going to see a lot more, not a lot less devices in our lives.
Yeah, diversification, different sizes, the right device for the right thing, right?
Yep.
And the nice thing is, if there's one thing the web has shown that it can do very well, it's responsive design and building a single experience that can work across devices. And I think if we get there with, and we just add AR and VR as just another one of those things the web can do, and that's all developers think about, I think that would be pretty neat.
Yeah, that brings up a really good point, Ada. What a question I have is, will companies, let's say a company that's already invested extensively in AR experiences, to publishing those on their internal platforms and making sure the right employee has the right experience at the right time, they have to manage a publishing path that is dedicated to the AR experience. Will they have to re-author or publish their existing experiences in a new way? I mean, people are going to have to go back and recode what they already have to take advantage of this, or not?
I don't want to put so many words into other people's mouths, but I think Unity does have WebXR support. So if you've built something with Unity, you could port it. And you may want to, like in the future, look at focusing on building something like streamlined for the web with like better experience. But I think right now you probably could build something that would work. Correct me if I'm wrong, Blair or Lars.
No, that sounds exactly right. I mean, there's two sorts of applications, right? There's, I think Blair was talking a lot about the stuff that already exists on your internet. So the stuff that you've already created, the content you've already created, whether it's videos or that. And then as Ada pointed out, in our ideal world, the browser is just able to interpret that in a way that makes sense for AR and VR devices. There's a second piece, which is if you've created some very bespoke AR or VR applications today, possibly as part of a pilot, you've probably used Unity, you've probably targeted exactly one device. As you look to scale up and look at that ecosystem, you'll have to figure out how are you going to make it run across many devices. Unity has a variety of options, and each of the device platforms have their own centralized management systems for pushing out binaries to each of those devices. I mean, alternatively, given the panel that you've got here today, we would say the web might be a reasonable alternative as you look at scaling up and supporting a lot of devices and doing more experimentation.
Right, right. Well, one more sort of question around who is doing what, and we can speculate a little bit, but those device manufacturers that you spoke of, Lars, that have their own authoring and publishing and asset management systems, they're going to need to test the WebXR compliant browser and then load or preload that onto their devices, or make those versions that are compliant available on their app stores. Isn't it going to, a lot of this rest on the shoulders of the display manufacturers?
Yes, either the display manufacturers or their partners. Obviously, as Mozilla, we try and reach out to a lot of manufacturers and offer our browsers. I know Samsung has a variety of devices they've offered over the years. And some companies, such as Magic Leap, have their own browser teams in-house that are providing their own browser. But through, hopefully through the great work that Ada and others are leading up, there will be a diversity of browser implementations, all of which implement the same standards in a compatible way, so that at least as content developers, what you can do is you can buy a device and you can have some assurance that there is a browser on that device that implements a compatible version of this set of APIs and the web platform in general. That's really the world that I think a lot of us are pushing for. But how we get those browsers on each of those devices is something that, like you said, is up to each of the display manufacturers.
Right. We have some questions from the participants. So I'd like to address a few of those. We've talked a lot about the strengths and of WebXR, but we haven't necessarily addressed any limitations. And especially we're interested in enterprise application. What would you say are one or two limitations of going in the WebXR direction?
So I'd
Wrong
say
panel, huh? Sorry.
So the limitations, I'd say, partly come from the web is an abstraction layer, and every abstraction layer has a performance cost. So if you are trying to ship a game or something where you really want to squeeze out every last cycle and get the absolute best graphical fidelity possible, the web probably isn't the platform you need. Like the trade-off between having this huge reach of people and huge pool of developers to pull from, like the trade-off is you're sacrificing some efficiency because of the abstraction layer.
Okay, that's a good answer.
The other downside is we're still a bit far, we're still lagging a bit behind the native platforms. The web will always be playing catch up because the web doesn't lead on stuff. The web sees what the native platforms are doing, and it does it in a way that works for everyone and is secure and is future proof. And making APIs that are like that and are pretty high quality, it takes a lot of time. So,
and you're not sure which ones to standardize on if they could be just temporarily popular.
Yes. So we're not the if you want to make use of the very latest cutting edge that the hardware can provide, you're probably not going to be seeing that through the web for a couple of years.
Okay,
So
let's talk about some other questions. I'd like to hit on quickly on some other questions. I think there's it's possible that people have heard of WebXR, but they've also heard about a Kronos group standard called OpenXR, and I think this comes back to that abstraction layer. Does anybody want to compare and contrast what is OpenXR and how does it compare with WebXR?
So I think OpenXR is attempting, I think of it as layers. So at the lowest level, there's the platform APIs. Every OS and device has them. OpenXR attempts to provide a uniform native API that crosses all those platforms to make it easier to build cross-platform native apps, or build native apps that you can compile from many platforms. The web browsers, or some of them, will use OpenXR as a target for their implementation of WebXR. So OpenXR is native abstraction layer. WebXR, while it has a similar name, is not related except insofar that the implementations may use OpenXR to make it simpler to have the browser run on multiple platforms.
I was going to add on to that. There is a small crossover between people working on the WebXR standards and the OpenXR standards. So some of it may look similar, but it's like a separate parallel standard.
For sure, for sure. At a different level in the stack.
Yes.
One question was, of course, you've mentioned it, all three of you, that there's this huge ecosystem of web developers. We're always trying to get, as web developers, they're always trying to get more capabilities, improve what they do and how they do it. Is there content or course material that has been already developed for teaching WebXR? For teaching WebXR principles, or is that not necessary? I think, Ada, you said if you use one of those frameworks, or like ARJS or A-Frame, then you don't really need to know about WebXR in detail. Is that?
Yes, I'd say that's actually largely the case. Like if you're already working in one of the many 3D libraries for the web, the library will probably implement most of WebXR stuff for you. Well, and you won't really have to worry about it. It's oh, sorry, Karen.
Oh, I was going to say, I think, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Ada. I was
Oh, it's fine, it's fine.
I was picking up from what you were saying. I think there's a huge overlap. There's a bunch of course materials on WebVR already, for example, but the real question is not how do you build with WebXR, it's how do you build these interfaces at all, right? Like what are good user interface metaphors to use? What are good ways, what are appropriate and effective ways of using AR or VR versus desktop, whatever. And I think there's not actually a ton of information on that yet. There's a lot of stuff coming out though. And so I think any knowledge on web AR and or on AR and VR will help. And then there's tons of materials on WebGL and these various tools and so on. I'm actually going to be teaching a class on AR and VR using WebVR at Georgia Tech next semester. So, but
just all sign up for that.
There's not a lot of web specific content right now. It's mostly just generic AR VR.
And to piggyback on that and answer one of the last questions, those interaction metaphors depend on what the user's goals are, right? So if the developer is trying to do an online catalog or help people order products that fit in their living rooms or in their car, that might overlap with the work of the 3D commerce group who are trying to develop the correct protocols or the best protocols for formatting different 3D objects and making sure that there's interoperability. So I'm giving that as an example that retail or commercial support use cases can use WebXR.
Yes. I mean, I think so. And you know, there's people from the nice thing in those cases is you'll get this sort of virtuous situation where a company like, you know, that does e-commerce like a Shopify or something could add WebXR features to their offering, their current offering. And if you're a customer, you may just get it for free. And then your job will be to use one of the standard set of tools. Like GLTF has become a very popular model format on the web. And so it's supported by all these tools, and there's starting to be more and more tools to export and convert and all that sort of thing. So I think
GLTF is a Kronos Group specification, just to
for models, yeah, for 3D models and interactive.
And transmitting 3D assets.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to finish up because we have reached the end of the allotted time. I want to thank our three panelists, Ada, Blair, and Lars, for your important contributions. There'll be many more discussions about this topic, I think, in the months and years ahead. And I look forward to your leadership in those conversations and educating the world. And everybody should go to the immersiveweb.dev website and learn there too. So I'm going to be closing this webinar at this time and look forward to speaking more in the future. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.